For the last couple of days, we have been shocked by what happened in Bucha. Bucha, Irpin, Hostomel, Motyzhyn and other towns and cities where Russian soldiers stayed have been destroyed and robbed. Should we remind how those cities were happy, self-sufficient and peaceful until the 24th of February? This is UA, the day that we survived. Ukrainian journalists have come together to create it with real people who record themselves and send us their recordings. In our previous episodes you heard Anna's recording, a woman who managed to escape Motyzhyn, which is near Hostomel. She survived, and now, after the liberation of her hometown from the Russian troops, she returned there to help her fellow villagers. She brings medical supplies and food. Alas, Anna cannot return to her home. The village is mined, and there is no electricity, water or gas. Russians cynically deny any violence towards civilians, but we can see on satellite images that dead bodies have been lying on the streets since the middle of March. Here are some more good deeds done by Russians. A resident of a village in the Kyiv region, without waiting for the clearing of the occupied territory, went there to pick up his car, but the car was mined by the Russians and the man died because of the explosion. An ordinary car of an ordinary man. Kind Russians left a cruel surprise. Alexander from Kyiv, whom we have heard in previous episodes, remains in Kyiv. Many tragic events have happened in his life in the past month. His mother, grandmother and brother stayed in the occupied village of Nalivayivka near Hostomel. Shortly after his mother managed to evacuate his grandmother and brother, his grandmother died, and their apartment was destroyed by airstrikes. Alexander does his best to help in the capital and takes part in volunteer work.
I'm in Kyiv now. I'm still a volunteer at the railway station. There were far fewer people here for a while than in the first days when there was such a rush. But I remember a few days ago there were shots in Kyiv. I live in Solomyanka. I was walking down the street when there were such loud explosions. I came to the station that day and noticed that there were already many people. And I also noticed that if none of the ticket offices worked before, now you can buy tickets. Dad is starting to work little by little now. I have nothing to do with it. He does it himself, and I'm volunteering. What exactly are we doing? There's a humanitarian headquarters at the station. There's our headquarters and the headquarters of the charity company Caritas. Humanitarian aid is brought to us from all sides, and we give it to those who need the help. They fill out applications on the site, and we help. There are very different people, and curious situations too. Once a man came and asked for some food, allegedly for territorial defense. He says, "Give me food." Well, we gave him everything. And another coordinator clarified, "We'll give you some lard." And he asked, "Salted or smoked?" It was very funny. He wanted to choose. My dad and I talked about leaving Kyiv. Dad comments philosophically, "After all, not everyone will be killed. And I don't want to leave anyway. I don't want to run away, and if I do go, where to? Nobody is waiting for anyone anywhere. And here I am at home, and I hope that I can be useful to somebody or something."
The Russians have retreated from the north of Ukraine. After a bold and violent assault, Russian soldiers have set up a fair in Belarus where they sell goods stolen in Ukraine. This is evidenced by the data of the Central Intelligence Agency of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine. Investigators have already published a list of soldiers who took part in looting and the cities they're sending the stolen property to. Among the stolen items there are tools, appliances, electronics, sneakers and even hairbands. As heard in the intercepted calls, Russians call their wives to tell them what presents they're going to bring home from Ukraine. Mariupol is still under siege. Around 140,000 people are staying in the city. The city council reports that the occupiers began to burn the dead in Mariupol in transportable crematories. Thus, after the public disclosure of the tragedy in the Kyiv region, Russian troops intend to hide the real number of civilian casualties. Oksana left Mariupol after spending several weeks in the basement. She didn't want to leave her hometown for a long time.
I'm from Mariupol. I loved and still love my city. I put a lot of effort and time into it because I believe that everyone builds their city. And I had built my own with the best friends, people from all the best things in it. Now all I have to do is miss it. I learned about the beginning of the war at 4 in the morning when my daughter from Kyiv called me. I didn't even have time to answer. I just saw her call and understood everything. But even in a nightmare, I could not imagine what would happen in Mariupol. And there was a real hell. You know, it's unprecedented. I don't think anything like this has happened in modern history. I packed my backpack, but I packed it not to leave, but to stay, because I principally remained as possible and as reasonable as it was, to help other people who needed it. Для того, щоб як могла допомагати іншим людям, які на це потребували. So at night I was in the basement of my house, in a bomb shelter, and I thanked God and the person who left the mattress there, which I used for 21 days. During the day, every morning, I went to the volunteer center where we tried to do something for others. We survived there because we did not have the strength to watch what was happening. It was simply impossible, and at work time passed faster. There was an illusion that you are doing something for your city, for its liberation. Twice a day I went up to my apartment for literally 15 minutes. I went up for some fast toilet treatments. I ran upstairs in prayer and went downstairs as well. Up there I had a bite, at the same time combing my dirty unwashed hair, trying to call someone from my family, especially my daughter. Even at first there was a connection, and then ran to the volunteer center. When I returned, I went home for 10 minutes and then went down to the basement where there were a lot of us. But you know, we were lucky, and in our basement there were very cool, strong, decent, beautiful people who supported and helped each other, who shared their last meal. Які допомагали один одному, які ділилися один з одним останньою їжею.
Even our children, many of whom were in the basement, grew up very quickly and instantly, and they were not just capricious, they supported their parents and other adults.
Вони не просто не капризували, вони
підтримували власних батьків, вони підтримували дорослих, і іноді я дивилася.
Sometimes I looked at them and it seemed to me that they were some angels here among us, ordinary people. They helped us.
Тут серед нас.
When you talk about the war and want to be understood and heard, you need to talk not about numbers, but about human lives. And I have a lot of stories that I have had for a long time.
Багато ось таких історій, які я ще довго, і я точно не вкладуся в відведений мені час.
And I do not fit in the time given to me. I will probably remember, write and tell people about it all my life for a while because it is important to know. Now I know exactly how fragile human fates are and how fragile everything that a person builds is. It is easy to destroy.
Дуже просто зруйнувати. Я буду розповідати
I will tell you about my friend's husband, who died in his kitchen because a brotherly projectile flew there.
До нього прилетів братський снаряд.
I will tell you that they could not bury him, and his body just lay covered in the apartment.
Лежало вкрите у власній квартирі.
And there was no funeral because the shell flew again and the apartment with the body burned down.
І квартира разом з тілом вигоріла.
I will tell about the father of my acquaintance with torn hand.
Знайомого, якому відірвало руку.
He took his hand.
Взяв свою руку. Просто взяв.
Do you understand? Own hand. And he went to the hospital. Nobody saw him anymore. I will tell you about another friend of mine who almost died during the shelling. His family was rescued from the rubble. And then he went to the hospital with broken ribs to help doctors save his son. Once the orcs took him and everyone in this hospital hostage.
Одного разу зустрівся в лікарні з орками, які захопили його і всіх в лікарні в заручники.
I will talk about the heroic people who defended the city and no less heroic people who helped them.
Не менш героїчних людей, які допомагали захищати місто.
About youth who drove around the city in their cars under fire, under air bombs to pick up people from the most dangerous places.
Бомбами, аби забрати людей, мешканців з найбільш небезпечних.
They moved around the city to help bring medicine or food to citizens and doctors.
Дати допомогу, привезти людям або лікарям ліки і їжу.
But what the Russian soldiers will say, I don't know. They will talk about how they caught up and killed more and more people, even those who no longer had a home, hid in the theater, art school, pool, and slept there on the floor with their children. They came and killed them, even those who have already been injured and were in hospitals.
Навіть тих, хто вже був поранений і був у лікарнях і шпиталях, навіть за ними приходили.
They came and finished killing. This is not even a war.
Це вже навіть
This is slaying.
Це вбивство.
Russia is gathering forces in the eastern regions of Ukraine. The regional council asks people from Donetsk and Luhansk regions to evacuate. People do leave, although some stay there anyway. In one day, Russian occupants conducted airstrikes on the cities and villages of Luhansk Oblast 81 times, using mortars, artillery, multiple rocket launchers and aircraft. civil infrastructure and residential buildings have been damaged.
In the outskirts of Popasna, evacuation is underway. But at the same time, the Russians are bombing the city hard with grads and planes. Therefore, the bombing here does not stop, and unfortunately will only intensify each day now. It's difficult to tell about the number of people. People fled with their own vehicles or were helped by volunteers. We evacuate people every day. As of today, about 30,000 people have been evacuated. It's impossible to count how many residents have left on their own. There are about 30,000 residents still staying in Lysychansk at the moment. There are already fewer people in Severodonetsk, but nevertheless, we do not stop evacuating. Every day we take people out. In recent days, we have been evacuating even more of them, from 1,000 to 2,500 people per day.
Citizens in eastern Ukraine have been living alongside war since 2014. Tens of thousands of people from the Russian-occupied territories have moved here. Now they have to flee again. The head of the Luhansk Regional Military Administration, Serhiy Haidai, claims that the Russian occupiers continue to gather equipment and manpower in the region and will try to attack in a few days. But the armed forces of Ukraine are ready to give a firm rebuff.